everyone. I think the panel is is understanding that we're between lunch and you all, so we'll try and make it as interesting as possible. First of all, thank you, Ovi, for having us here to share our perspectives. The first two panels, I think this panel is just taking the conversation further. As Mr. Tu, I think, mentioned about how difficult it is to hire. I think we have some specialists here who will share their own experience on hiring talent across. So if I may just start by, because you have been introduced, we have 25 minutes. I have a lot of questions, and I'm sure the audience have a few questions as well. So I'll skip the introduction part, but straight away get into some questions. If I may start with you, Anne, because you are into recruitment, and we're hearing about this whole money coming into Vietnam, investments coming into Vietnam. We heard the C levels that they require talent. From your perspective, what are some of the skill gaps that you are seeing? Both from an organization's perspective, but also from a talent perspective.
Thank you very much, Abhishek, and welcome everyone. Thank you for staying here until this time. I know you're all very, hungry and want to go to lunch, so hopefully we'll get past through this quickly and as interesting as possible so that you can all get to lunch. Before I start on sharing what my, perspective regarding what the landscape looks like in Vietnam, I think I'm, just gonna go quickly in terms of, my background so that you know where I'm coming from when I share my landscapes, right? So I was born and raised in Vietnam, and I lived in Vietnam until I was 16. I left Vietnam, lived abroad for, some times, and then came back to Vietnam in 2012. So I've been in Vietnam for about 12 years, enough of land to actually, I think, to see the shift in the trends. And if you ask me what the trends looks like in terms of, how corporates in Vietnam are hiring, there can be, three observations that I see. So the first observations I see is that there is a movement from, multinational company to a local big corporate in Vietnam. And that is very clear. And I think that's really positive for Vietnam, because if you look into Japan and South Korea, the way they move is also a lot of talents moving from multinational company to local big corporates. So Vietnam is on the same trends of, if you asked me 10 years ago, people would, start working for multinational corporate first before they move into. But now, a lot of them would choose to go to local conglomerates. So that's number one trend that I observe. The second trend that I quite disagree with Anh Tu here, even though we're good friends, is that Vietnam don't pay a lot. Now, the second trend that are very interesting is that 10 years ago, if you ask a lot of HR, and we have, Alexis here who is in HR, we talked about local benchmarking when it comes to pay compensation, right? But now the trends has shifted to not local benchmarking anymore, but international benchmarking. So we talked about, benchmarking Vietnamese salaries or compensation structure with international standards. And we're talking about APAC, starting points, Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Thailand, to benchmarking against, the Americans or the European markets. And just to recorrect what Hal was sharing from the beginning, Janus has brought over 800. The exact number is 774, not over 800. But it's still a lot. And that says, in order to bring these people back from the US and Europe, local companies in Vietnam have to do compensation benchmarking with international standards in order to bring them back. So of course, I agree partially that you don't expect a huge, pay or compensation structure in Vietnam, but it's not too far off. Actually, right now, we are able to pay a lot of people from Singapore, and at the management level, we are actually above Malaysia at the moment when we want to hire. So that's the second trend that I see. And the third trend is that we talking about moving from hiring just expats who has, no heritage connection with Vietnam towards more preference for overseas Vietnamese. And that happens a lot within the past 5 years. I was so lucky to be able to capture that opportunities and brought over so many overseas Vietnamese. But that conversation is now, being preferred by a lot of companies in Vietnam. So they don't prefer, a completely expat who has no connection and cultural heritage or any affinity to the country. They like overseas Vietnamese, like a lot of us here, who have a certain connection with the country somehow. Maybe some of you have never worked or never been here, but in deeper part of yourself, there's still that connection to Vietnam. And that's what a lot of companies are shifting their preference towards. That's the 3 trends. Now, the skill gap, yeah? I see that there are a number of areas that I think overseas Vietnamese or expatriates talent will continue to contribute the most values. The number one lacking in the local talent pool is R&D. Research and development capabilities. And you talk about R&D in all of the sectors, in manufacturing, in retail, in FMCG, in banking, anything that has R&D. We don't have strong R&D capabilities in the local markets, and that continue to be the areas where we hire expats and overseas Vietnamese over. The second thing is digital transformations. So anything that has to do with transformations across, whether it's in finance, whether it's in, marketing, whether it's in HR, whether it's in, product innovations, everything that has to do with digital transformations, we still have to hire from abroad. That's, hopefully within the next, 10 years, that would change a little bit when, the next generations is getting more knowledge from the new, from their leaders. So that second. The third one is scaling beyond border. And that's interesting because why? Because if you talked about 10 years ago, not a lot of companies in Vietnam are talking about going outside of Vietnam. Now, there are a numbers, even though still very few, but there are a number of large conglomerates and big corporations in Vietnam talking about going outside of Vietnam. And when they wanted to go outside of Vietnam, they don't know how. So scaling beyond borders, how you make sure that your products stay relevant to foreign markets, those things are still quite hard to find in a local market. So we still have to hire talents from abroad and overseas Vietnamese, so that's number 3. Number 4 would be managed with scale. And by that, what I mean is, if you know about Vietnam economy, you would know that the majority of Vietnam economy, local companies are small, medium enterprises. So we don't have a lot of large organizations that offer the scale. So when large organizations wanted to scale above what they are at the moment, they hit that ceiling of capabilities. And that's where they have to hire expats or, overseas Vietnamese who has worked or exposure in larger scale organizations. Because think about it, how many companies in Vietnam has, annual turnover of more than $3 billion US? There are only a few of them, yeah? So managed with scale is something that still continue to be lacking in the local talent pool. And one last thing, is data and technology leadership. And why I say leadership is because if you look for a software engineering or if you look for execution level staff, it's easy to find here. Yeah, it's easy to find here. There are a lot of opportunities for fresh graduates, and they're very good. They're very good at execution. But when it comes to leadership, thinking about what would be the infrastructure required for the company in terms of technology and data, they don't have that vision. So we're talking about, data and technology visions and leadership. Those would be the areas where overseas Vietnamese and expats continue to contribute values.
Thanks, Han, for painting such a clear picture in terms of digital transformation, and that's the reason why probably Mr. Tu was plugging in on digital transformation and the talent needed, R&D, scaling beyond borders, and scale. And the trend that you mentioned about this whole multinational to local brings me to the other 2 panelists who represent an MNC and a local organization, so Alexis and Thin. What are the considerations that you have when you are looking at, obviously, talent recruiting overseas Vietnamese or otherwise, and also from overseas professionals, how do you assess for them if they have to assess a multinational or a local? what should be some of the considerations that they should have while looking at either of your two organizations? Alexis.
So hello everyone, very happy to be here today. So before I dive into Abhishek's question, I just wanted to say that I really love the themes of this year's seminar, Crossing Over, because I think it resonates with many of us, and all of us here are crossing over to some extent. So Abhishek, you cross over from overseas to Vietnam. You've been here for many years. Myself, like Anne, I am overseas educated, spent a few years working overseas, and also from a professional perspective, I crossed over from MNCs to local organizations. So I spent about 13 years with British American Tobacco, working across end market and regional roles, and then about 15 years ago, I decided to switch to Techcombank. And so far, I have had the chance to work across the ecosystem, Techcombank One Mount, and now with Masterise. I have had the chance, because of crossing over, to meet and work with many interesting colleagues. So, and we work together at BAT, and Antu earlier at Techcombank as well. So I think you guys are standing at a very exciting threshold, deciding to cross over. And I am pretty sure from our personal experiences, you will not regret it. So now coming back to Abhishek's questions, your first part is about where do we look for talent, and what should talent consider when choosing career opportunities. So for organizations, when we look for talent, it really is about what the talent can bring. So there is no limitation in terms of geographies or boundaries, but it's really about whether your values and what you want to do align with what the organization wants to achieve. Because similar to a marriage, it would be happy ending if we all aim for the same thing and share the same values, and together we can do big things. So for example, at Masterise and also Techcombank, we look for people both in and outside Vietnam. Really, there is no discrimination. We welcome everyone as long as you want to create value and also wants to make a difference. For us, I'm so happy not just about the theme resonating with all of us, but I think opportunities like today's seminars bring us closer together. So we reached out to you, I think at Techcombank and maybe at Masterise. Techcombank have already done quite a lot of overseas talent roadshows with the support of Anne and Janus as well, to come and find you, and now you also come here and find us. So I think we really appreciate opportunities like this to bring us together. And the rest is really up to what you want to do and whether the organization has the right opportunities for you. Now, on that note, what are we looking for? I really want to reframe the question a little bit. What do you look for? Because it really is about providing you with choices. The organization you choose to work for has to resonate with what you want to do. And I can give an example, and maybe Tin, you can also expand that a little bit. If you want a vision and a purpose, you want to contribute to the country in a direct manner, then local organization definitely would be better. Because I think Vietnam has been growing very fast, and with the enablement of the government, a lot of private sector conglomerates have really been growing, reaching international standards, helping the country to grow sustainably, reducing external reliance, and at the same time providing opportunities and choices for both OVs and also local Vietnamese, in addition to MNC career opportunities. So if you want a place where you are empowered to make an impact, where you are empowered to pioneer first in Vietnam and also bringing Vietnam out to the world, then I think local organization would really provide that. If you want a place where you can deal with ambiguity in a positive manner, where you build things and not just maintain things within an international and global framework, then local organizations are really for you. On the other hand, if you want to work in a structured environment where you have a lot of guidance and local international frameworks to look for and to learn, then maybe MNC would be better. So for me, there is no better choices. It's really up to what you want to do. Are you a maverick? Do you want to really create bigger impact in a bigger playing field, contributing to the countries? That would then decide, which playing field would be more appropriate. Yeah. So maybe Tin.
Right, so I'm gonna just follow up with what you say. So, hello everyone. So my name is Tin, and I'm not really a novice. I studied in Canada 30 years ago, and I came back to Vietnam. I've been working in Vietnam since then. And just to go back to your question, I think I'm gonna go a little bit in details for the key considerations, between the multinational company, the local company here as well. So I think, of course, when you look for a job, you also need to care about your career development and the training opportunities as well, right? So I think like for the multinational company, the career progression is really set clearly below level, and they all come along with the proper training program or the mentorship opportunities for you to support you to reach to where you want to be. But on the other hand, I think for a local company, you could be able to access to the senior role in a very quicker way, especially if you apply for a job in a company, the Vietnamese company, that in the phase of transformation, or, they plan to expand their business overseas, then you actually, as a novice, you can bring your international knowledge and expertise into that kind of initiative. So that's also the thing that you have to consider between these two. And I think it's more about the, the scale as well. Let's say the company, like the big scale for the MNC, sometimes as a novice, we feel a little bit impersonal. But the other way, for the Vietnamese local company, you may feel like more like the family-like atmosphere. So it depends on what you like and what you prefer. But at the end, I think there's one more thing we also put in our considerations is like the diversity and inclusion. Because as an OV, sometimes we feel like an expat, right? So, but some multinational company, they have the unofficial D&I, diversity inclusion program that actually can make you feel included when you work for the company. But when you work for the local one, the inclusion might come from the network or the relationship. It's combo way. I think they both have the advantages for you to consider. But at the end of the day, it's more about how you reflect yourself and see what you prefer. It's not about picking this one over the other, but it's more about choosing the work environment you feel, you can fulfill both your personal and your professional interests. Thank you.
But on that last point, I want to, disagree a bit. I think local organizations are pretty inclusive as well. And you work for a local organization before, even at both Masterise and Techcombank, the percentage of expat or Vietnamese having overseas exposure is also pretty high.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think I just wanted to add in that perspective.
They might have fewer, but not they don't. I'm sorry.
No, so I think what I'm hearing from both of you is, one, values alignment is what first and foremost is most important. But there are advantages and pros and cons from a multinational versus a local. And as you have elaborated, those would be some of the considerations that many of you could possibly take. Taking this forward, if I can get back to you in terms of looking at these observations, what would be some of the mindset challenges? Because I heard Mr. Tu also mentioning about the transition. So what would be some of the mindset challenges that an OV might face when they're transitioning into corporate roles, coming back into Vietnam?
Thank you, Abhishek. I think I got asked these questions millions of times. Every time we have a one-to-one conversation with OVs, or every time we have a session about coming back to Vietnam, mindset has always been the number one question to be asked. Now, let me ask the audience first. How many of you here have already crossed over? Worked in Vietnam? Oh, not a lot. So how many of you are 50% thinking of coming back to Vietnam? 50%. More than 50% towards 70, 80%? Okay. The rest of you are under 50%? That's really sad. Okay. I hope that after today, some of you will bump that percentage of interest up a little bit above 50%. Now, I think, I'm going to reframe the questions a little bit in terms of mindset. I don't think mindset is something you can change overnight. It's not that, I say to you today, your mindset should be ABC, and then tomorrow whoops, I changed my mindset. It doesn't work like that, right? Mindset is something that has to be experienced and changed, and it's shaped by the people you interact with and the exposure and the experience. And you're not going to get that change in mindset unless you are in it, unless you are in that experience. So what should we do, right? I think there are a few traits that characterize working in Vietnam that we should be aware of, right? So the first thing is very ambiguous. And the way I say ambiguity is because have any of you ever read the book called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer? If you read that book, and I really recommend that you read that book if you wanted to work in Vietnam or any other country, right? It highlights a very important difference between culture and that shape how a lot of corporates operate and how people in different culture cooperate. Erin Meyer by The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. And it's classified Vietnam as a very high context culture. So in a very high context culture, and I think, maybe Japan is in a similar way or South Korea in a similar way, in a very high context culture, not a lot of things are clear, right? People say this thing doesn't mean it's that thing, right? You have to kind of read between the lines a little bit. You kind of have to navigate a little bit in terms of, insights. People seems to arguing, but are they really hating each other? Or people hugging each other, are they really loving each other? Most of the time is not the case, right? So Vietnam is a very high context working culture, and that is number one thing that we should be aware of, right? So we shouldn't be judging people by just how they say it or how just they act, right? And we have to read between the lines a little bit. The second thing is it's quite unstructured in a way. And we have to be able to, we should be aware of that unstructure, of Vietnam economy being a bit unstructured so that we are comfortable with working with unstructured things, right? A lot of time when you enter a local conglomerate, you will feel like it's a construction site. Lots of things are being built, people running in different directions. Sometimes a building is built up and then it gets smashed by the chairman. You have to rebuild it again. It's a common thing and it's normal, right? So if you are not comfortable with working with something unstructured, then that should be something you should be aware of, right? Maybe you should join a more structured environment, like a multinational company, to get a feeling of it first, and then you move into a more unstructured environment. So I think that's the number two we should be aware of. And then another things I think is it requires a lot of patience and resilience. And why I say that is because not everybody in the same organizations have the same understanding as you. And there's nothing wrong or right about the way they understand things. It's just because they have different experience and different exposure, so they don't understand the same thing as the way you understand. So sometimes if you want to get everybody on the same page, it requires a lot of patience. And like Antu said, it requires a lot of, interactions, discussions, and you need to get them to understand what you're saying, exactly what you're saying. And sometimes they don't understand it the same way, right? If you're talking about, for example, I share an example. If you're talking about customer experience, right? If you mention that word, customer experience, about 10 years ago, people think that is a customer service. A lot of people in Vietnam would understand customer experience as customer service. So you take care of customer after you do the sales. But customer experience, and Alexis can correct me, it's very different from the way you look at it. So helping your team to understand the concept the same way as you understand it, it's very important. So I think it requires a lot of resilience and patience in that sense. And I think one practical advice that I usually share with a lot of OVs, how many of you here have driven in Vietnam? Drive, car, motorbikes? Okay, well, that's very good. The reason why I say that is because if you can navigate Vietnamese traffic, you have a higher chance of success of working in Vietnam. Why do I say that? So it requires a few things, right? It's required first is keep calm, right? If you get panicked in the traffic in Vietnam, you won't be able to get anywhere, right? So you have to keep calm all the time. Even if you see crazy things coming at you, it will be fine, don't worry, keep calm, right? That's number one. Number two is I think, when you drive in Vietnam, you kind of like have to like zoom in and zoom out at the right time, right? If you already see the traffic jam from far behind, you kind of like have to scan the radar around it and see, okay, this is the best way I would go around this, or go onto the pavement. Now, don't do it now, because there's a big fire now, but, you have to like scan out, zoom out at the right time, and like zoom in at the right time. What do you zoom in? If you're stuck in the traffic, you don't look around. Ignore the rest. Just keep moving. Just keep moving. So driving in Vietnam does give you that, resilience and calmness to navigate to that chaotic scenes. And I really encourage all of you, if you want to work in Vietnam, please learn how to drive because it's very important.
No, I think that's a great analogy of, because what you mentioned about creating structure in an unstructured environment, having the patience and the resilience, it all happens while you're driving on the roads of Vietnam. So thanks for sharing that. I want to take a question from an audience. I think we have some time. If you have a question, please do raise your hand if you want to ask one of our panelists. While you're thinking about your question, I can probably just continue with another question about, we've understood how organizations are preparing or should prepare from a skills perspective. But I've also seen that it's not only about organizations, but it's also about re-entry into the environment and the society, right? Because many of them have been away from Vietnam for a while. The things have changed, the ways of working has changed. So how should OVs prepare for the next chapter of life, not only in the corporate side of things? And I would love to hear from Alexis and Tin in terms of how do you prepare when you hire some of these OVs and expats to prepare them for life, not only in the corporation?
So I'm going to be super practical. I think, first of all, you want to look for a job here, or you want to, have a career life in Vietnam. I think you need to research the current market landscape to see like what kind of job skills out there, which ones they demand. And I think the next one is like upskill yourself. I think, let's say that, learn some certifications that relevant to local market demands. Let's say you're in finance. So I'm sure that like the local accounting standards will be super useful for you to put in your CV as well. So I think after learning all the certification, I think the next one is like update your resume. Because I think it's really good to make your profile different from the others, right? So you're a novice. Sometimes you apply for expat job in Vietnam, but you have to take the advantage that you're a novice. Otherwise, you just the O, not the V, right? So to make you more like the V, you have also to understand the Vietnamese culture and the Vietnamese language, which Antu just said you need to learn the languages, right? Because at some point, no matter how international we are, we also have some little requirement for the local interaction in every job that we have here as well. So I think let's make your CV a bit like, more local, put some global experiences, but connect to the local context in your CV as well, and put on your certification that you learn as well to make you different from the others. So some practical preparation that I can share. Maybe Alexis can share more.
Thank you, Tin. So I think we are now the only thing standing between you and lunch. So let's maybe quick. I just wanted to build on what Anne and Abhishek say. I think the best preparation is to be clear about what your motivation is, why you want to come back, and what value you can create for yourself and for the organization that you choose to work with. So from a people perspective, for candidates, and Anne can also maybe resonate with this, the first thing that we wanted to explore is what drives you back. So if you want to be back because you want to create values, you want to build things, you want to leave your own legacy, you want a big playing field, then that's the right things to do. And the rest can be taken care of. But if you're not clear about where you're coming back, maybe you just want to explore to see what's out there, then maybe regardless of how well you prepared, it might not stick. So I think be honest with the motivation and what brings you back. And to the point we talked about earlier, if the values match, then whatever difficulties that lies on the way, if there's a will, there's a way. That's what I believe. The last thing I wanted to share is, and take this in the right light, I think stay humble and stay open-minded, because we cannot prepare for everything that happened, but we can prepare ourselves, how we deal with the challenges. And the key point for me here is staying humble, because a lot of us, and including myself, when I first started to cross over, we were under the misperception that local organizations are bad, are subpar, below standards, and we are here, we are more superior, and then you will be surprised, because a lot of local organizations are already reaching the stage of thinking, of mindset, and level of investment, almost very much on par, at least, with area or regional standards. And for example, Anne talked about CX. I think Techcombank, and I'm sorry, Leo and ACB, but I believe we are leading the market in CX, and we have the best mobile apps. So thank you, Anto, for building it in the first place. And talk about scale.
They're both gone, so you can brag about Techcombank.
And yes, we have many good and big local conglomerates, and I think Techcombank and Masterise are fortunate to be among the local companies with annual turnover approaching or even exceeding $3 billion as of now. So I think our local organization, our country are already moving very fast. So please come back with the mindset to contribute to make it better. And let's not think about being here and fixing things, because really it's our mutual journey. There's no things to be fixed, there are only things to be worked on together and making it better. So I think if you come with the right motivation and you come with the right mindset, then, all preparations are not needed, and all preparations are never enough. Just go ahead with your heart, and what drives you, and let's make our country better. So if you come back with that, you will always be successful. I think that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Alexis. Can I just add on a little bit? I share with you my personal story, right? So when I first got back to Vietnam, I also worked at BAT with Alexis. I was in both the local and regional role, and then when Alexis came over to Techcombank, I was already head of HR for a foreign bank. Very peaceful life, working for multinational companies. And then Alexis brought me over to Techcombank. And I remember the first 2 months, every day I came into her office and I cried, and I was like, I want to quit. I cannot do this anymore, Alexis. And I remember whenever she saw me running into her room, she would prepare like a box of tissue. Because she know that I was just bawling my eyes out, and I was just gonna, talk to her about all the frustrations that I have working for local companies. But to be honest, I've never learned so much in my life, working for looking for a local company, because that's where you make all the decisions, that's where you make all the impacts you could have. No further layer, regional, global, is above you. So you are the headquarter. You make all of the impacts you have. Now, I just wanted to add on one last thing, is that I mentioned that mindset is not something you change overnight. Same with get ready. You are never ready. You're never ready until you actually do it, right? And yesterday we were having a company tour with Vietcetera, which is one of our clients, and the chairwoman of Vietcetera, she says something that really resonates with me. She said, getting ready is a process. You are never ready until you are in it. So all I'm saying to you is, if you really want to come back, just do it and embrace that chaos, embrace that challenge. And always remind yourself of why you are here, what your purpose is. And that will help you get through the hiccups and the roadblocks, because I guarantee you're gonna get a lot of roadblocks, and you're gonna get a lot of hiccups. And a lot of stones and bricks will be thrown into your face and your head all the time. But always remind yourself of that purpose. And if you are lucky enough, you find a boss like her, who have the tissue ready for you whenever you want to cry out, but then tap on your back and then keep going, keep moving forward.
No, thank you so much for all three of you sharing. So it's get your clarity as to why you want to come back, the skill sets, around R&D, digital transformation. There are a lot of skills that are required in Vietnam, so choose the skills. They're both MNCs and local organizations which are really looking forward to having you as part of their organizations. And last but not the least, compensation for the right skill is there. So it's not that we are hiring cheap. So thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts. Thank you.